Studies in the Gospel of John. Lesson 11, A Second Sign, Healing from a Distance. Review and quizzing. Take a sheet of paper and try to think through the first 10 chapters of John. Write down 2 or 3 events or significant statements from each chapter. Do the best you can from memory, then open your Bible and make a more complete listing. You want to summarize things so that you can remember the main events and surrounding context. Pause the video and complete this assignment. Jesus returns to Galilee. Read John 4:43 to 54. There are 2 main ideas: Jesus' reception by the Galileans and the account of the royal official, a desperate father who came to seek help from Jesus for his dying son. A second sign. John offers a second sign for our consideration. We've been plainly told that Jesus had been doing numerous signs. Thus, John's reference to this being a second sign cannot refer to this incident being the second miracle that Jesus ever did, nor even the second miracle performed on his return to Galilee. It means that of all the many miracles that Jesus did, this is a second example that John records for us to consider. Remember, his purpose is to convince us of who Jesus is so that we may believe in him and may have life in his name. John 20:30 and 31. Leaving Samaria for Galilee. Earlier in this chapter, Jesus had been asked to stay for a few days with the Samaritans. He agreed to do so and had effective ministry among them. After remaining with them for 2 days, he and his disciples once again took up their journey to Galilee. Almost as an aside, John recalls a statement that Jesus had spoken: "A prophet is without honor in his own fatherland," verse 44. The Greek indicates that it was something he said at a point in time in the past. It is one of several such statements that are found in all 4 Gospels. Jesus' previous experiences. In these parallel passages, the people of Jesus' hometown took offense at his words and miracles, saying in effect, "Who does he think he is? This is just the carpenter's son." They remembered him as the boy who had grown up in their streets. It would not accept words of correction or challenge from him. Instead, they saw his bold statements as impertinent. Offended and angry, their hearts were closed to him and his message. As a result, he could do no miracle there except that he laid hands upon a few sick people and healed them. And he wondered at their unbelief. Mark 6:5 and 6. Sequence of events. Incidentally, we're not told directly the sequence of events, though there are some interesting parallels to note. In all 4 Gospels, these incidents precede the feeding of the 5,000. Matthew, Mark, and Luke record this statement as occurring after John the Baptist had been arrested and shortly before his death. In John's record, the Baptist was still quite active even as recently as the beginning of this chapter. Matthew and Mark begin their record of Jesus' ministry after John's arrest. The arrest of John the Baptist. Putting all of this together, it would seem that John the Baptist either recently had been or will very soon be arrested by Herod. Therefore, we are about at the starting point where the other Gospels begin their records of Jesus' ministry. If this is accurate, then the examples from the Synoptic Gospels had not as yet occurred. Therefore, Jesus' statement that a prophet is without honor in his own country must have been based upon other past experiences with his family, friends, and neighbors. A common experience. This is an important principle which many of us will face in our own experience. Often the ones who are most difficult to convince are family members and friends from our childhood or our past. People who knew us in our past often tend to continue to think of us in whatever role we had at that time in our lives. Not only do they tend to disbelieve or minimize the significance of our heart change, they often do what Jesus' acquaintances from his early life did. They become offended at us, misunderstood, or misinterpreted. They may think we are phony, or that we are judging them, or that we are suddenly thinking we are better than them, when those are not at all our thoughts, attitudes, or motives. This can be very confusing and frustrating for us as we simply try to share what God has been doing in our lives. When God chooses to repeat a teaching or event in the scriptures, it is usually especially important. This principle is repeated in all four Gospels, and it was Jesus' own experience. We should not be surprised then when it may happen to us. On Jesus' heart. It is interesting that this principle was apparently upon Jesus' heart as he prepared to return to Galilee. Even more curious that John would have mentioned this utterance here, since there really is nothing in the context which he provides which would indicate that Jesus was not being received with honor. Predictable reactions of people. As we put the facts together, we find a common experience that Jesus had throughout his ministry. On the one hand, people were very excited and curious about the signs which he did, many even going out of their way to see and hear him. On the other hand, there were also many who were offended by him, often because of jealousy, or because his teachings and actions confronted their own shallowness or shook up their preconceived notions. The signs, while definitely getting people's attention, did not necessarily cure the ills or break down the prejudices of the hearts of those who witnessed them or heard of them. Positive reception. There was no indication that the Galilean Jews were rejecting him in John's account, at least not yet. On the contrary, they seemed to welcome him. While in Jerusalem for the feast, many had heard Jesus preach and had seen the miracles he did there. Therefore, they were excited that he was returning to Galilee. Again, we see John refer to other signs that Jesus was doing, but which were not included in this written record. Back to Cana. He came to Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine. It's verse 46. As we had mentioned before, the fact that both he and his mother had been at the wedding feast there probably meant that he had relatives in this town. And it was also the hometown of Nathanael. While they say criminals return to the scene of the crime, here Jesus returned to the scene of the sign, the first sign, turning water into wine. While it had been done in near privacy, by now it surely had been talked about and was known by many. A royal official. There was a certain royal official whose son was sick at Capernaum. The word for royal official basically means of the king, and could refer to an official of the king, or possibly someone of royal blood, or even one of the king's close friends. Here it is probably someone connected to Herod the Tetrarch of Galilee. Chuza in Luke 8:3 or Manaen in Acts 13:1 are two examples. This man's son was sick, near to death, in Capernaum. Desperate father seeks help. News traveled abroad quickly concerning Jesus' whereabouts, a testimony to the impact he was already having. When the royal official heard where he was, he went to find him. Cana is located due north of Nazareth. It's about 18 miles from Capernaum, which is on the Sea of Galilee, but it's about 3,450 feet higher in elevation. It would have been a strenuous hike to try to cover in one day. He must have been quite desperate to leave his son at this time. knowing that he would be gone for at least 2 days. He obviously had a hope in Jesus' ability to heal that went beyond mere curiosity. Begging for Jesus to come. When he found Jesus, the text says that he was asking him to come down and heal his son. Verse 47. The Greek verb indicates continual action. He was asking repeatedly. He did not get an immediate positive response from Jesus. He was urging or begging him to come down and heal his son. The Greek word structure places the emphasis on the asking or begging by using a purpose clause. He was imploring him in order that he might come down and he might heal his son. The reason for the father's urgency? His ailing son was at the point of death. Apparent rejection, a test of faith. Jesus addressed his response to the man, but seemed to be lumping him together with the entire unbelieving populace in verse 48. The statement in Greek is very strong. If ever y'all might not see signs and wonders, not never, for emphasis, might y'all believe. On first blush, this seems to be a rejection of the man's request, or at least an impatient response of resistance. Looking a little closer, however, there are some important observations to make. Observations from Jesus' response. First, this statement could simply be a statement of truth. The signs were given to direct people to faith in Messiah Jesus. Secondly, Jesus is looking for a different kind of faith than just the belief that he could do miracles. From his comment, it's quite clear that doing miracles was not enough. The miracles were not ends in themselves. It was not enough to dazzle people with a floor show of supernatural wonderments. The issue was about believing in, trusting in, or giving allegiance to Jesus as the Messiah King sent from God. Jesus chose not to dazzle people. Thirdly, isn't it interesting that in this very countryside where he would soon be facing their rejection and unbelief, where he would even soon be marveling at their unbelief and would be unable to do miracles there because of their unbelief, that he chose not to come blazing in with a dramatic show of miraculous power to awe and impress his relatives and countrymen. They had seen him do miracles in Judea, and they were expecting him to do them here. But he was interested more in teaching and preaching than in performing on demand. A challenge to the man's faith. Finally, it seems evident from the following context that he was setting the royal official up for a challenge to his own faith. By making his statement generic, Jesus points out a flaw or weakness in the faith of the multitude. But he's not making a judgment on the man himself. The official is free to choose to be different than what has been the normal reaction of the crowds. Would he need to see signs and wonders in order to believe? Faith becomes evident through action. When the father renews his plea again, restating the urgency of the situation, Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your son lives." Jesus granted him the purpose for which he came, the healing of his son, but refused his request, which was to come with him. Of course, the official had no visible evidence to suggest that anything had occurred at all. Jesus' words, "Unless you see, you will not believe," took on a new meaning. If he insisted that Jesus comes with him, he would be admitting that he didn't trust or believe him. The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him, and he started off. As is often the case, faith is evidenced by action. Good news. When the man met his servants on the way back home, they reported that his son was doing better. Upon comparing times, the official realized that his son's improvement coincided with Jesus' pronouncement to him. As a result, he and his household believed in Jesus. Different levels of faith. It is interesting to note that John's recording of the man's faith implies that this level or kind of faith was different than that which the official had possessed when he trusted Jesus' word and started on his way back home. Before, he believed Jesus could do something. And after his interchange with Jesus, he trusted that Jesus would do something. Now he trusts in Jesus himself and evidently became a committed follower of his. His loyalty and allegiance were committed to Jesus. He entrusted himself to Jesus. Evidence of his faith. One evidence of the reality and depth of the royal official's faith is the fact that we even have this incident recorded for us. How would these events be known unless the man himself had later reported them? Evidently, he began publicly promoting Jesus by recounting his testimony. To the people in Cana or in Nazareth, this was not evident at the time. Jesus' involvement was, for all practical purposes, out of their sight. The story came out because this man testified of what trusting in Jesus had meant for him and his family. Observations from this experience. Other observations from this episode. First, we do not always have to be present or lay hands on someone for God to be able to work. This is a second incident recorded in the New Testament where the Lord purposely healed someone in absentia. The other being the case where he cast out the demon from the Canaanite woman's daughter in Matthew 15. That doesn't mean we should disregard these other means, but let God be God and do things however he wants us to do them. God is not limited by particular methods. The importance of perseverance. The other lesson which both these incidents exemplify is the value of perseverance in prayer. In both of these examples, the petitioners were confronted with apparent rejection. Jesus initially seemed to put them off. As they persevered, however, Jesus granted their desire. Jesus taught us to pray with importunity or shameless persistence, Luke 11 and Luke 18. Interestingly, the Canaanite woman was also told that her prayer was answered, but Jesus did not accompany her to minister to her daughter either. Again, she was left to either trust him or not, and her faith was revealed by her actions. Summation. 3 important lessons from today's study are: first, people who have known us from our past, especially old friends or family members, may be resistant to our testimony. They may make judgments about us that are not true. Don't be surprised. It happened to Jesus, and it will often happen to us. Second, God can heal people or minister to them at a distance. While it may be helpful to be present with someone who needs prayer or ministry, to anoint them with oil or pray with them, it's not necessary. God is the healer, with or without our presence. Third, Jesus is looking for faith that results in action. Faith will go to God with needs, but faith will also choose to follow God's direction.